This presentation is a collaboration between Drs. Chowan, Mann, and Cook and the workforce planning boards in the Western region. We will provide an analysis of the Employer One survey data collected in 2015. We would like to begin by providing the background behind this research project. This collaboration includes several partners in both industry and academia. While the workforce planning boards collected the survey data, Drs. Chowan, Mann, and Cook completed the analysis of the data with future plans of publishing in academic journals and presenting at academic conferences. We are extremely excited about our involvement in this project and about the opportunity of future longitudinal analysis. While each of the workforce planning boards conducted analysis of their own region, our research was able to aggregate all of the data from all of the regions and analyze at an aggregate level. Our research also allowed us to examine the average of the entire dataset and determine which regions were above and below this benchmark for each variable of interest. Our analysis also provided an opportunity to highlight which findings were statistically significant, as well as the difference between those findings that were substantially versus statistically significant. A significant amount of time was spent cleaning the data to ensure that all missing data were treated consistently. Locally generated results may vary if missing data are treated differently, and this can result in comparisons between regions being imprecise. In other words, while each region conducted their own analysis, some regions included organizations with missing questions, while others discarded entire organizations with missing questions, thus making it difficult to make comparisons across regions using their own individual analyses. Therefore, we were able to provide comparisons across regions with our aggregate analysis by treating all missing data consistently. This slide provides the descriptive statistics for our analysis. While 1,914 organizations were surveyed, after correcting for missing data, the final number of organizations in our analysis is almost 1,500. The number of organizations is provided for each of the 9 regions or workforce planning boards. 78% of these organizations were a head office, while the rest were a branch. With respect to the life cycle of the organization, 74% of the organizations were established, 19% were considered to be in the growth stage, and 7% are startups. The next slide provides a breakdown of organizations by industry. It is interesting to note that manufacturing and other services are the largest industries, followed by healthcare and social services and retail trade. The average number of employees is 111. This slide provides the average number of employees for each of the regions. Note that Hamilton, Sarnia-Lambton, Windsor-Essex, and Elgin, Middlesex, Oxford are all above the average. The subsequent slides provide analysis of key questions of interest, including topics such as wellness, separations, hiring, and support for training, as well as a comparison across regions. I will go over the first slide in detail to provide context of how to read the subsequent slides. The mean, or average, at the top of the chart can be used as a benchmark, and you can determine whether each of the 9 regions is above or below the benchmark. For example, when asked whether the organization participates in a wellness program, 39% said yes. Bruce Gray Huron-Perth is below the average with 29%, as are Elgin, Middlesex, Oxford, Wellington, and Niagara. Chatham-Kent, Grand Erie, Windsor, Essex, and Sarnia-Lambton are above the average. Our analysis also provided findings on which regions were not only substantially different, but significantly different from each other. For example, with respect to organizations having a wellness program, Bruce Grey Huron-Perth is significantly lower than Chatham-Kent and Windsor-Essex, and Windsor-Essex is significantly higher than all except for Chatham-Kent. The two right columns are the lower and upper confidence intervals bounds. The reported mean differences can be seen by looking to see if the respective 95% confidence intervals overlap for each of the regions. Organizations were also asked whether they experienced any separations over the past 12 months. 66% said yes. There was not a lot of variation across regions, with the only significant difference being between Hamilton and Niagara. Organizations were also asked whether they hired anyone over the past 12 months, and 77% said yes. Hamilton was significantly greater than 6 of the other regions. There were no other significant or substantial differences and minimal variation across regions other than Hamilton. 12% of organizations use a paid recruitment agency. Again, there was not a large amount of variation across regions. Bruce Grey Huron-Perth was the only region that was significantly different than other regions. Employers in this region were less likely to use a paid recruitment agency. What is particularly interesting is that 48% of all organizations found that positions were hard to fill. Chatham-Kent was significantly lower than other regions, meaning that it wasn't as hard to fill positions in that region. And Hamilton was significantly higher than other regions, meaning it was harder to fill positions in that region. Organizations were also asked whether they were planning on hiring in the next 12 months, and 68% said yes. This is good news that organizations that had separations are still planning to hire. What is worth pointing out, though, is that while 68% are planning to hire, recall from the previous slide that 48% are finding positions hard to fill. Hamilton shows the strongest likelihood of hiring, with 87% of organizations planning to hire in the next 12 months. Hamilton was the only region that was significantly greater than almost all other regions. The lowest percentage was in Sarnia-Lambton and Chatham-Kent, with 59% of organizations planning to hire over the next 12 months. 79% of organizations were able to provide support for ongoing training and educational opportunities for their employees last year. There were no significant differences between regions. A summary is provided of the averages for each of the questions of interest. As a reminder, 1,325 organizations answered the question on wellness, and 39% of organizations had a wellness program. Based on feedback we received during our initial presentation to the Workforce Planning Boards, we were able to access publicly available data from Statistics Canada on unemployment rate by region and incorporate those data into our analyses. This slide shows the average unemployment rate across regions to be 6.94%, and the average participation rate across regions to be 64.25%. This slide shows the unemployment rate and participation rate by region. The participation rate is just as important as the unemployment rate. Individuals who have no interest in working are not included in the participation rate, but are included in the unemployment rate. Also based on feedback from our original presentation, we were able to recode questions to form a new variable to examine whether the organizations received assistance from a free employment agency for the following groups: immigrants and visible minorities, youth between the ages of 15 to 24, and older workers. 11% of organizations said yes. And further feedback from that presentation led us to examine the availability of qualified workers, with 4 being excellent and 1 being poor. The overall average is 2.33, and the average by region is also presented, along with any significant differences. This slide shows the proportion of available workers who are considered to be poor through to excellent. It is interesting to note that a substantial proportion of workplaces report the availability of qualified workers as good. The majority, 55%, report the availability of qualified workers as either fair or poor, while only about 6% report excellent availability of qualified workers. The next 2 slides show the proportion of the availability of poor, fair, good, and excellent workers by region. For example, the first line on this chart shows that 23% of workplaces in Bruce Grey Huron-Perth rate the availability of qualified workers as poor. It is interesting to note that 11.6% of workplaces in Wellington rate the availability of qualified workers as excellent. For each of the variables addressed at the beginning of the presentation, we have also provided a breakdown by industry. While we will not go into details here, the analysis is presented if needed. You can pause the presentation to examine any of these slides in detail. This chart provides the correlations between the variables of interest. For example, there is a correlation of 0.22 between planning to hire and finding positions hard to fill. This positive and significant correlation demonstrates that organizations who are planning to hire are also likely to find those positions hard to fill. Also of interest is the positive and significant correlation between separation and hiring and separation and planning to hire, meaning that organizations that had separations last year, hired last year, and are also planning to hire new employees this year. This is a positive indicator. The positive correlations tell us that organizations that support training also have wellness programs. The correlations that are bolded and underlined are statistically significant. The positive correlation between quality of workers and total employment suggests that larger organizations perceive a higher quality of available workers. The next slide shows whether each region was higher or lower than average on each variable. A down arrow indicates that the region is below the average on that variable, and an up arrow indicates that the region is above the average on that variable. This chart can be difficult to interpret given that some variables are positive and some are negative. For example, a down arrow on the hard to fill variable can actually be considered to be a good thing. So, the next slide presents the same information as the previous slide, but presented in a different way. For the good variables, the up arrow becomes a plus sign. But for the negative variables, namely separation, using a recruitment agency, and finding positions that are hard to fill, the up arrow becomes a negative sign. This chart can be used to present an overall picture of each region. More plus signs for each region could be considered to be good news for that region. We can get a picture of each region by examining this slide in more detail. For example, if you compare Bruce Grey, Huron-Perth, and Wellington, both regions have higher than average unemployment rates and participation rates, and yet they vary on several other variables. Employers in the Bruce Grey, Huron-Perth region are below average on offering wellness programs and supporting training. They have had separations in the past year, have not been hiring as much as other regions, are not planning to hire, are finding positions hard to fill, and find the quality of available workers to be lower than other regions. Contrast that with Wellington, where employers have been hiring, are planning to hire, are supporting training, and are not finding positions difficult to fill. In addition, in Wellington, there is a perception of a higher quality of available workers. We are really interested in working with each region to understand the story of what these findings mean for their region. We can then decide on future, more in-depth analysis that would be of value to all stakeholders. Going forward, we are interested in discussing the implications of these findings with stakeholders, as we will be seeking to publish this analysis in academic journals and present at academic conferences. Our future analysis will also include regression, and after subsequent years of data collection, we will also conduct longitudinal analysis. We would ask that you please cite this presentation with our permission. Please email us at the email addresses provided with any questions, feedback, or thoughts on interpretation of the findings. We look forward to hearing from you.